All right, here we are, lesson 8, faith, love, and obedience. I love these two scriptures that are at the top kind of capture it. This is me always like slipping in more scriptures than actually the 5 or 6. But yeah, Paul says the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. And John says, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. And I like putting these together because there are ways of thinking about Christian theology and stuff that almost like pull them apart, that faith becomes this purely mental thing and love becomes a purely emotional thing, and obedience is somehow almost like a negative word because we're saved by grace, and so trying to be obedient is like trying to earn our salvation or something like that. But the scripture doesn't talk about any of those words in those ways. And so we want to take our definitions really from the scripture. So first, obviously, there's do we understand what the original words the authors meant or used meant? So like faith, the Greek word pistis is it's actually on the further study page. You can see it. It can mean sort of faith or trust, a firm conviction, and so it's a more relational word than just sort of an agreement to ideas kind of word. But more than that, we have to ask ourselves, what is real faith? When the Bible talks about this faith, it's a saving faith, what's it talking about? Because we can call something else faith, kind of like growing up, my mom, there's 4 kids, and so she would call me Kale or Casey sometimes. It didn't make me Kale or Casey. So we can call something faith. It doesn't make it faith. Naming it, unless you're God, naming something doesn't change the nature of that thing. Yeah. And so we want to make sure we're listening carefully to the scripture on this. So yeah, Hebrews 11, that whole chapter, people have called it the roll call of faith. It's this, what did faith look like in the lives of all of these people in the Old Testament? And then chapter 12 is sort of like, and what does that look like for us? So it's a great passage to read and study and reflect on. But if you want to read just the very beginning of it to us.
Just verse 1?
Yeah, just read verse 1.
Okay. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see.
And so he talks about this sureness and this certainty, but it's a certainty in what we don't see. And I don't think that means it needs to be a blind faith. Blind faith is rarely very certain. Biblical faith is based on certain kinds of evidence. We have reasons to believe these things. We believe and have a solid conviction because we've seen what God has done, and so we trust him to act that way again and again and again. Blind faith isn't really biblical faith. Now, there can definitely be a time where we trust God in a moment where we're in the dark and we can't see anything. Yes, we're certain of what we don't see. But in that case, we're trusting God based on the character of God that we've already come to know. Just like I might trust you to tell me the truth because I've spent years around you and I know you don't lie to me. And so it's not blind faith for me to do that, but it is stepping out on faith. I don't know this time. Maybe you changed, maybe a doppelganger came in. Maybe you're an alien this time. There's lots of maybes, but a lot of times that's not how we really live life. We all live by faith every single day of our lives. We go to the doctor, and I have never called my doctor's medical school to verify that they actually graduated. And if you read the news every once in a while, you see stories of someone that's been practicing medicine that didn't ever go to med school. We, in that case, we're sort of placing our faith in, the medical boards and in journalists and people that sort of keep that thing to a minimum.
Yeah.
I've never seen gravity, but it's at I see the effects of gravity. And so every time I get up from a chair, I'm not like holding on to something that's fixed down just in case. I'm living by faith in something that I can't see and have never seen, but I have good reason. I have a certainty about that. And we could talk about lots of examples. Historical things are usually like that. I have great faith that George Washington was a real person. But I didn't meet him. There's just sort of historical evidence that he was there. And even if you were like, well, this is his skull, I'm like, the skulls all kind of look the same, or this is his whatever. We're still kind of like, why do I believe that's his? Well, on the basis of historical evidence. And so we're living by faith, and the Bible's not calling us, I think, to a different kind of faith or to an unreasonable faith, but it is calling us to step out in trust. And then read verse 6 there.
It says, "And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him."
So it's not just that I believe that God exists. And James would say, even the demons believe that, and they shudder when they think of it. It's that I believe something about his character, right? I believe that he exists, and that if I earnestly seek him, he's going to reward me for that. So I believe that he's trustworthy. I believe that he returns good for good. And so there's a deep trust in his character that is biblical faith. And that's kind of what's being captured. And that kind of faith, if I really believe that if I, give you something good, you're going to give me something back even better, then I'm going to give you something good. I'm going to do that. And so it plays out in action.
Yeah, I think that's a good passage too for people who are just being introduced to the faith. It's like the more that you seek God, you won't find something different than what you've already heard.
Yeah.
And I think that's what some people are afraid of, is that they'll find something that some character of God that he's actually not the way he's been presented.
Yeah. Well, and Jesus talked about that when he talks about asking for the Spirit, asking for more of God. And he says, like, you're evil. And if your kids asked you for an egg, would you give them a scorpion? It's like, how much more God, who's actually good? Like, he's not going to, if you ask for something good, he's not going to give you something bad. Yeah. Romans 1:17. Why don't you read that one out loud for us as well? This is where Paul is talking about a righteousness that comes from faith.
It says, "For in the gospel a righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last. Just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith."
Now, there's a lot to unpack here, and Romans is a deep book with lots to think through, but righteousness, means right relatedness, that this being in right relationship with God and with others, this restoration that comes. Sin breaks all of that, right? Sin breaks all of our relationships in different ways. But he says in the gospel, there's a righteousness, and he says that righteousness is by faith from first to last, beginning to end, right? Sometimes we even miss that because it's kind of like, we think, well, in the Old Testament, it was a righteousness by effort. No, it wasn't. Go all the way back to the very beginning. And where does this whole thing start? It starts in the garden. And it doesn't start with God giving them a bunch of rules. It starts with God saying, like, just eat from this tree of life. Just trust me. Don't worry about knowing all the rules. And it's Adam and Eve wanting to know good from evil and wanting to decide from themselves that actually takes them away from God, not gets them to God. And God's kind of like, all right, you can try that method for a while. It just doesn't, it's not going to work. It's by faith from beginning to the end. And we see the same thing all the way at the end of Scripture and the end of pictures. It's those who put their faith in God that are going to be vindicated and are going to get to be with him forever. So they've entered into a trusting relationship with him. And it's that from us. We don't start our own relationship with God in faith and then end with something else. It's, if I start a relationship with God when I'm 5 or I'm 20, It's not like, well, but if I get to 90, then I'm relating to him in a different way. No, it's still that I trust his goodness, that I believe that if I earnestly seek him, he's going to reward me.
Yeah.
And that's how I get to him. And so after he says it's by faith from first to last, he quotes and reiterates, the righteous one will live by faith. So faith isn't just something that we have and hold, a list of ideas that we, signed off on a piece of paper a while back. It's a whole way of life. If I really trust God, I'm going to live very differently than someone who doesn't trust God. And I'm going to know whether I trust God by whether I'm striving to bring my life in line with what he says is good and right, or whether I'm running away from trying to live my life in a way that he says is good and right.
Yeah.
And then that brings us into James. This is a passage, Martin Luther, who started or kind of kicked off the Reformation, loved the book of Romans, spent a lot of time in that. And then James seemed to have this kind of contrasting message, and so he hated it. Some people say he ripped it out of his Bible. He didn't like it. But I think it was just a misunderstanding in a lot of ways of what James is getting. And we don't get to rip books out of our Bible.
Yeah.
That the Christians all along have said, no, like both of these books, even though their messages have some tensions between them, both of them capture truths about God. And so what James here is talking about is faith without action, and there's no punctuation in the Greek, that we have, but I could imagine that if we did have punctuation and he was writing in English, James would probably be putting quotation marks around faith in a couple places in this passage. So read that to us, 2:14-17.
What good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith, that's probably what he put there, save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes or daily food. If one of you says to him, "Go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead.
Yeah. So this is James, the same one that used that simple analogy of the mirror, like looking in the mirror and forgetting what you look like. Here he's got this other analogy. He's like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like someone's starving in front of me and I'm like, yes, be well fed. And then I leave. He's like, yeah, that's pretty much useless. It's kind of like insult to injury. And he's like, that's what faith, when you don't do anything with it, is like. It has no value. It has no power, has no potency. And so he wants us to show our faith by what we do. Not that we somehow, by what we do, earn grace, or that we somehow, by what we do, gain faith, or he's just saying what you do is an expression of what you really believe. It's showing what's in your heart. And if what's coming, Jesus said, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. I was talking with a guy a few weeks ago who's getting ready to get married, and he was talking, they'd been having some conflict, and he was telling me this story about they had a fight, and he's like, and then, I just kind of got mean, but it was kind of like it was her fault. And I'm like, okay, time out. If you got mean, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Like you've got something to deal with. You can be Jesus was mistreated, and he never got mean, and he never got hateful or spiteful, because his heart was full of good things. And so we've got to deal with what's in our hearts. And I think sometimes this is not about making us feel bad. It's about helping us take a reality check of where am I and what needs to grow. I do believe, God, help me overcome my unbelief. I've got too much lack of faith going on in my heart. And it's shown by the fact that my life is lived for career and grades and accomplishment and people pleasing, and it's not lived for blessing the people around me and seeking after you. okay, let's be real. God will hear that prayer. When Jesus said, anything's possible for those who believe, and the guy said, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. Jesus did do that healing. That was enough.
Yeah.
A mustard seed faith, but it was an honest faith. It was enough. I'm here, aren't I, Jesus? You know, it's like, let's see what you do. And faith grew from that. So yeah, what do you really believe? Your actions will be revealing of that to some degree. And it's a wake-up call to all of us, right? If I really believed my sin was damaging, I would quit. You know, if I really believed that was death all down that path, I would repent. But I still struggle with some of the same sins. I still go back. They still seem the best or appealing sometimes, but it's revealing of what's in my heart. I'm not going to try and cover that up and act like I'm perfect, you know, or that I always live perfectly by faith every moment. I've got to be honest with God. But it also tells me where to be honest and where to start changing. Yeah.
That's good.
John 14. Yeah, let's read this. This is Jesus speaking. And it's just pretty simple what he says here.
He says, Jesus replied, if anyone loves me, he will obey my teaching. My Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. He who does not love me will not obey my teaching. These words you hear are not my own. They belong to the Father who sent me.
So John, in both his gospel and in the first John letter, deals with this theme a lot. And this relationship between love and obedience is one that we don't always like. We like to think of love as a feeling. I feel love for God. I was like worshiping the other day and I knew I loved God. But Jesus doesn't say, like, if anyone loves me, he'll have chills during worship. He says, if anyone loves me, he'll obey. He'll be seeking to grow in his obedience and becoming like me. And then he says, if you don't love me, you won't obey. Like it's the litmus test is pretty easy. And again, I don't think that means that we need to think like if you've disobeyed God anytime, you don't love him at all, because this is all living on a spectrum. But I do think we've got to be real about the fact that if we're living in rebellion, active rebellion, and then, you know, getting in these moments, whether I'm by myself or with people, it's, oh, I love, and I have strong, the feelings can be deceptive. You know, there are people in our culture who are abusive spouses, and they feel, oh, I love you so much. I love you. Please don't leave me. I love you so much. I feel these really strong feelings. I do batter you, but you know, but I love you. It's like, no, you know, that's not love. That's not a healthy kind of love. It's not a life-giving love. It may be a kind of obsession. It may be an intense emotion, but love is more than that. It's deeper than that. And so we want to point that out with God. We obviously don't have the ability to, you know, hit God or something like that, but we do have the ability, we saw in that last lesson, to hurt God by the way we treat the people around us. And that's what most of his commands are about, right? What was Jesus's main command that he taught? It's, well, love other people like I loved you. It's kind of hard to find like specific commands that Jesus gave, but that one's pretty, a new command I give you. That one's pretty clear. So we're just trying to establish this relationship between love and obedience. That love isn't just a feeling. It's a way of living towards someone else that can be accompanied by intense feelings. But intense feelings are hard to hold on to. And so this can be, in 1 John, he even says, this is how we can set our hearts at rest in his presence whenever our hearts condemn us. Sometimes I feel like, it's like, oh my gosh, I just don't think I love God, and I this and that. And he's like, just look, are you loving the people around you? You do. You can rest and know you're living in obedience, and that is love for God, whether you feel it right now or not. So
yeah. Yes, this is just a side note, but I think sometimes you certainly walk into like large gatherings like FNFs, and sometimes you're just not feeling it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes just looking around and seeing the people also in worship. You're like, okay, if that person believes, then I believe too.
Yeah.
So I think it's powerful to have people around you that also have a faith, so that when you're struggling, they can pick you back up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can be that for them
Yeah.
at times, for sure. Yeah. And so then we switch from John's recollections of Jesus to his direct writings. 1 John 4:19. You want to read that, 19 to 21 for us?
We love because he first loved us. If anyone says, I love God, yet hates his brother, he is a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. And he has given us this command: whoever loves God must also love his brother.
Yeah. So here's kind of, again, the rubber meets the road thing, that we, just like we can't separate love and obedience, we can't separate love for God and love for other people. And people do try to do this. That it's like, oh, I love God. It's very personal. This came out of, if you look back historically, with the Enlightenment and this sort of rise in scientific thinking and all of this, people in some ways kind of became embarrassed almost of their faith. And faith became this very private thing. And so we sort of have like, here's things that are in the public sphere, science and politics and da-da-da. And then here's things that are in the private sphere. And those are, sex and religion and, and these kinds of other things. But the problem is, Jesus will not be confined to the private sphere of our life. It's not just something that's between me and him. It's about every aspect of our life, public and private. He's not looking to be some little piece of my life. He wants to be Lord over all of my life. He doesn't want to be one of my priorities. He wants to be my prioritizer. He decides what stays and what goes. And he decides how much I give to each of those kinds of things. Now, he is not a micromanager in that. He teaches me the broad strokes of those things by the example that he set for us. Come, follow me, he says. That's the invitation. I'm going down the path that leads to life through death. And you're going to have to walk that path with me if you want to end up where I'm going to end up. Because wide is the road that leads to destruction. Lots of people go down that road, and you can go down that road. And the end is that. But if you want to go down the path to life, you're going to have to follow me. That's the one I'm on. Yeah. And it's a narrow road. And you don't get to do other things besides the things that I do and walk that path. He's showing us where it is. So, yeah, we just want to watch this, that anything that sort of divorces, the way we treat others or how much we love others from how much we love God is not a biblical teaching. This idea that I can be a Christian and not have anything to do with other people or just be solo or, I'm an introvert, so it's okay for me to just be sort of self-centered and self-contained all the time. No, it's not okay. God is calling us. You can have your personality, though he may want to change some parts of your personality. All of us need some of our personality doesn't look very much like Jesus. But I also think the Bible writers don't specifically tell us about the details of Jesus's day-to-day personality because they didn't see that as the important part to imitate, right? They weren't like, oh, and he was really funny. So then we're all thinking like, oh my gosh, and I've also got to be funny. It's like some people aren't funny and some people are, and some people are more serious and some people, but we see enough of the way that he lived because it's not about personality, it's about character. What does a person who's introverted and like Jesus do versus what does a person who's introverted and not like Jesus do? They won't end up looking exactly the same. And so Jesus is Lord even over my personality. He's calling me to be like him, even though I'm a specific gender, a specific ethnicity, a specific age, a specific, nationality, and I live in a specific place and I have a specific personality, but he may call me out of any of those kinds of things in various ways. He may call me to act in ways that don't fit my culture's standard of masculinity. He may call me to act in ways that don't fit my culture's standards of my age. He may call me to act in ways or even move away from my country. That all of that is under his lordship. And I think we've got to be careful about the different ways we try to sort of siphon off parts of life and make God a private thing. He doesn't want to stay in that little box that we made for him.
Yeah, I find it hard sometimes. You do a devotional and you're like, yeah, I'm going to go out there and show the world that I love God. But when you actually step outside, that's when, how you said the rubber meets the road and you actually have to live it out. Yeah. And I think you can measure how deep your faith is by your actions. Yeah. So yeah, any given day you can go and kind of tally how many times you did something for the Lord and can kind of measure it a little bit like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that's not about earning something. It's just about a heart check sometimes to see like, man, did I live a life of love for others today? And maybe a single day isn't, maybe a week or something, because days have weird schedules and some days I have very little choice in what I do. But there are those moments in every day for sure. So yeah. And then this just leads to this last question, again, a bold question. Is there someone in your life that's hard for you to love, or a group of people that's hard for you to love? And I think that it can lead into this conversation of like, what do you think it would look like to love them in truth, to love in action? And how do you think you could, it almost becomes this private thing between you and God of like, he knows and I know that I'm doing this thing for that person because I love God, not because I like that person. But I don't have to make that obvious to them. That can be our secret. Jesus talks about giving. He says, when you give, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And he says, because then your Father who sees what's done in secret will reward you. And so I think there is something blessed when we are a blessing to people and they don't even know what it cost us, but God knows. And that was a private thing I did for him. It was a way of expressing, and he'll start changing my heart towards those other people too. So, and then this brings us back to a core question we saw back in Ephesians 2, back in the grace lesson, this idea of being saved by faith. And so we ask, now that we've looked at a much bigger picture, how would you describe, what do you think the Bible means when it says saved by faith? What's the bigger picture? Don't be simplistic. We want to be growing in a richer picture of all of that. And then this further study takes us a little bit deeper, reflecting on, can I really see evidence of trusting God in my life? It looks at 1 Corinthians 13 and this description of love, and has a prayer activity to reflect on that. And just thinking, this never fails to be convicting to me. If I just sit and think through, have I been patient with everyone? Oh, I can almost always think of some people that I haven't, have I been kind the last couple of weeks? Like, oh, I can almost and so I start seeing, and God, the Spirit starts revealing to me, like, this is what love really looks like. And I can recommit myself to that. So yeah, reflecting on that. And then next time we're going to talk about rebirth. Yay. I'm excited about it.